Sorry guys, one more announcement. There is Wi-Fi available if you are needing, and the password is PetroConnect, capital P, capital C. Check, check. All right, welcome back everybody. I hope everyone's feeling refreshed and you've got some fresh coffee and you're ready for the rest of our session. Just before I bring up our next speaker, I would just like to reiterate that, again, this is a free benefit on any one or garage policy. Both myself and John Oosthuizen, who's here from One, will be available to engage with you after. So even if you have insurance questions, feel free to chat with us after the presentations. All right, so without any further ado, I'd like to call up our next speaker. And we have Fani Rakoza from SARS, who is going to be giving us his presentation. Fani, if you wouldn't mind joining us up at the front.
Thank you very much. I see that we still have some of the delegates that are still outside. If we may kindly ask them to join us. But Program Director, without wasting time, let me confess that I'm really impressed that in my time here, SARS' name has been mentioned 42 times. So I'm not sure if we still have work to do here or whether we're the most popular agency in the house. But to all our colleagues who have delightfully mentioned our names, we thank you very much. We find ourselves here today at a very critical time in the life of SARS. Sis Mata, I carry a message with me that on the 31st of March 2025, the Commissioner would expect us to deliver a revenue target of over 1,841 billion. So I'm on a very, very tight due date. But be that as may, I'm quite impressed with what I've seen in the parking lot as well. So it tells me that as I walk out of here, I might have good news to deliver to South Africans. Thank you very much. Getting into the business of the day, we're talking learnerships. And maybe just before we touch on learnerships, that our mandate as SARS is to do what? Is to create what we call a capable and a developmental state. And as SARS, we play a very critical role in doing what? In delivering that capable and a developmental state. So what we are about to touch on today also extends on that mandate. And who we are in the bigger scheme of things, or in these learnership programs, what is our role and where do we come in? But when all is said and done, at the end of the day, the central message that we carry is the message of compliance, and not only compliance, but voluntary compliance. Because as SARS, we believe that each and every taxpayer is inherently a compliant taxpayer and is inherently a person that SARS can rely on. We can move on. Okay, no, that's fine. So, I would speak about who is SARS, what is our mission, and what are our strategic objectives, which should encompass part of this presentation. So as I've said, that our vision is to build what? Is to build a smart and modern SARS with unquestionable integrity. So the question of integrity therefore becomes very critical in how we conduct ourselves internally and how we engage with the larger public, or how we engage with taxpayers. And that smart modern SARS over the past 5 years, you'd know or you would have experienced how SARS has moved towards what? Towards what we called digital platforms. I don't know if there's many of us here that still engages with SARS physically, that still walks into a physical branch office, or what we have done over the years is to move our service offerings into these digital platforms so that we can be trusted and admired not only by taxpayers, by also our peers throughout the world, but more importantly, by the public that we serve. So that level of integrity between us and the public that we serve, it must remain at all critical times. Now, we have taxpayers that have had engagement or certain experiences with SARS. Most of them, I would attest that there have been pleasant experiences. There are instances where taxpayers would have or would raise issues with us, and we would, as and when required, attend to those. But part of our objective is to do what? Is to provide clarity and certainty to taxpayers. So, in your engagement with SARS, what we endeavor to do is to ensure that when you walk out of that engagement, we have provided clarity to you. We have provided certainty to you as a trader, as a taxpayer, so that you are able to meet your tax obligation. Secondly, what we seek to do is to create awareness amongst taxpayers as part of our strategic objective, and to help taxpayers to do what? To help them to meet their tax obligations. So that's critically what we stand for, SARS. But lastly, what we also aim to do is to detect those who are non-compliant and make it hard and costly for them. Because there are instances where taxpayer would deliberately seek not to comply or seek to use numerous ways and avenues in order to do what? In order not to comply. And where we detect such behavior, SARS does endeavor to make it hard and costly for those taxpayers. And I mean, some of these cases, as well as you know, they are in the public domain. I mean, it's cases that are, that are discussed or that are part of the conversation in the public domain. To say that as SARS, we will leave no stone unturned. We will leave no stone unturned. We will touch every grain of the sand to ensure that what is due to the fiscus is collected, and each and every cent that is due to the fiscus is collected. So, now, let's talk learnerships. And what is critical in what we call this learnership. So, we must find these three elements in any learnership. So, no learnership would be recognized or would be taken as what? As a learnership if these three elements are not in place. The learner, the provider, and the provider in this instance, we're talking the applicable SETA in this instance, and the employer. So in any learnership, and I know here I might be talking to the converted, but it is very important that in any initiation of this process, these three elements must be in place. Now, when we talk learnerships, we're not talking learnerships in a vacuum. So we're talking registered learnerships. And remember, for any business or any employer to be able to gain benefits into the incentives, they must be what? They must be what we call a registered learnership. So this learnership or a registered learnership, it must be recognized in terms of what? In terms of the Skills Development Act. Someone mentioned earlier on that the money that goes into learnerships or into the SETAs is the money that is collected through what? Through the SDL, the Skill Development Levy. So that is very important, that a registered learnership or a registered learnership agreement, it's in accordance with what? With this legislation. Because a learnership, it's what? It's a product of a legislation or a piece of legislation which was entered and which should be entered into between a learner and an employer. So a learnership cannot be entered between an employer and their what? Better half. That is not considered to, or that is not classified as a learnership. So there must be an employer or a business in place which will enter into this agreement with what? Into this agreement with a learner. So from 1A, this deduction is granted to employers that enter into registered learnerships with employees that were not employed at the time of the agreement. So in essence, what does this mean? You cannot enroll or enter into an agreement a person that is employed at the time of the agreement. Am I clear? Someone, I see someone is edging to ask a question. Please, ma'am. You're not only looking at unemployed, but that individual must not be employed or be part of any other learnership at the time. Yes, they must not be part of any other learnership at the time, more especially if it is in the same industry. Yes. So it cannot be considered, or that agreement cannot be considered to be in line or to be in accordance, because that employee would have benefited previously or would be an employee somewhere else or in the same particular industry. Now, where does SARS comes in here? So you know that as employees, part of your tax obligation, or as employers, part of your tax obligations is to register for pay as you earn. Pay as you earn, known as per year. So if you have employees that you employ, and based on their earnings or based on their income, so you'd have employees that are eligible to be registered for pay as you earn. Those who earn below the tax threshold, they would not be. But part of registering for pay as you earn, you are then registered for what? For UIF and also SDL. So your UIF and SDL are not considered to be what? To be tax liability. Because for UIF purposes, SARS is the collecting agency for the Department of Labor and Employment. And for SDL purposes, SARS is the collecting agency for what? For the SETAs. So, what are the requirements? You don't necessarily need to register for pay as you earn separately, UIF separately, and SDL separately. That registration process, it's linked. So if you register for pay as you earn, we'll issue you with an SDL number and also with a UIF number. But remember, SARS only collects the UIF amount, which is 2%, 1% from the employer and 1% from the employee. And this should not be confused with the SDL amount, which is 1% from the employer. So the percentage that applies for UIF and SDL are not the same. For UIF purposes, it's 1% from the employer and 1% from the employee, which is managed or administered by the Department of Labor and Employment. And for SDL purposes, it's 1% from the employer and not the employee. Let's move along. So what are the changes? So the prior qualification for learner entering learnerships agreement will be determined by the value of the claim. So if I may ask that, please ignore the date of 2022, because it says the continuation of the LTI is up until 31st March 2027. So it's not 2022, a typo on that presentation. But employers can continue to still claim beyond that date. So if you still have learners or you still have agreement with learners at the time of this date, employers can still continue to claim, provided there is still what? There is still an agreement in place. What is critical is that at all material time, the agreement or the learner agreement must be in place and it must be signed. And where does this become critical? This become critical for compliance reasons. Because as and when you submit your claims, part of compliance would need that agreement and other supporting documents as well. So now, let's talk about Section 12H. I've heard it being mentioned earlier on numerous occasions. And what is this Section 12H? So this Section 12H enables businesses and employers to make a claim for tax deductions. This Section 12H enables business or employers to make a claim for tax deductions for qualifying expenses. So we'll talk about the qualifying expenses later on. But it must be for what? It must be for qualifying expenses. And most importantly, the qualifying expenses that have been incurred, they must be approved for the learnership program. So what does that mean? Then that means the employer can make a claim for certain qualifying expenses to the exclusion of certain things, which we will mention later on. And as I said, that the agreement or these allowances are not linked to skills development. And one would say, now I'm a bit contradictory. The skills development, it's collected as 1%, which goes into the SETAs. But the agreement itself is not linked to skill development, because skill development is just a piece of legislation, but the SETAs are the ones that administers what? That administers or that are part of these learnership agreements. So, two types of deductions. One, you have your annual allowance, not deductions, your annual allowance, and a completion allowance. And let me speak to the second allowance first. This is a once-off allowance that is available in the year of assessment in which the learner has successfully completed the program. Critical. So that means for this allowance to be granted, the learner would have what? And I'm talking now about the completion allowance. It's a once-off, provided the learner would have successfully completed the learnership agreement. And one would ask, in an instance where the agreement is not completed, it's done for 2 or 3 months out of a period of 12 months, we will talk about the pro rata as to how you qualify for this, but it will be on a pro rata basis, because this allowance it's only available in that particular year of assessment, provided the learnership itself has been completed over the period of the signed agreement. So the annual allowance, it's the one that you'd be more familiar with, which is available each year of assessment. And so what determines the year of assessment, obviously, is the financial year end of the company. So as you know, that the financial year end of companies would vary. But this is apportioned over that period, and if the agreement was not in effect for a full year. So what does that mean? So you cannot sign an agreement for 3 months, because the allowable period that you can sign is over 12 months, right up to 24 months. And the second allowance will apply in case that agreement has been seen through. But you have instances where the agreement is not seen through, whether a learner would leave due to various reasons, you have instances where maybe the employer or the business would raise issues about, their allowances not being paid on time, and we'll talk about what happens in those instances. So linked to the previous page. So the annual allowance is subject to a pro rata reduction if the registered learnership does not cover 12 months, which explains the previous slide. So if the whole 12 month period has not been completed, so the allowance would be reduced to what? To a pro rata based on the duration that the learner was involved in the agreement. And obviously, the different rules will apply in determining the completion allowance for a registered learnership agreement spanning less than 24 months and those which cover a long period. And as I indicated, that learnerships should cover a period of 12 months right up to a period of 24 months. But in some instances, it could be longer than that. We have had instances where I think at SARS, some learners were on a program for a period of 2 years. I don't know of more than 3 years, but I know of learners that have been on an agreement for a period of 2 years. And this amount are increased if the learner is a person with disability or a person living with disability. So you'd see that the allowances that are granted to learners who are not living with disability versus learners who are living with some form of a disability, there would be differences in terms of those allowances. And these allowances also depends on the NQF level held by the learner. And so you know that we have NQF level 1 up to NQF level 6. Then you'd have NQF level 7 up until the LQF level 8. And for the purpose of this legislation, those are the NQF levels that are catered for. So the employer will qualify for the annual allowance under these conditions, or on the premises of this condition, that during any year of assessment, the learner is party to a registered learnership. And so you cannot claim when there is no learner that is party to a learnership. And I think earlier on, someone in the presentation also spoke about ETI. Because we have had employers who claimed ETI for ghost employees. And they would claim that we are employing individuals between the age of 18 up to 29. But when we do their pay-as-you-earn or we do their recon, their interim or annual recon, you find that they claim for non-existent employees. And which makes our lives very difficult. Because now we have to embark on a process to detect those people and to make it hard and costly for them. And from time to time, we have dissuaded employers, from engaging in such practices, because obviously this disadvantages learners that should actually be benefiting from this program. And depending, the learner holds an NQF level 1 to 10 and not in employment. So it doesn't matter at which NQF level the learner is in. So they can hold NQF level. Obviously, it would depend on how far they have gone in terms of their academic journey throughout that period. And that agreement must be entered in pursuant to a trade that is carried out by the employer. So that means the learners that you'd be taking on board, that process must be pursuant to a trade that is being carried by the employer. I think PetroConnect, it's a prime example and a good example of that. And I mean, earlier on, we heard from people who have been through that journey. So PetroConnect connects, or it brings on board people that are pursuant to that, or that are pursuing a trade in that particular industry, because it serves no greater purpose to bring in learners that are not pursuing a trade in the industry that you have registered them in. So we always encourage employers to bring in learners to do what? To bring in learners that would pursue a career or that would pursue a trade in the same industry that they are benefiting the allowance from. Okay, we spoke about learners living with disability and those living with no disability. And you'd see that the value there, to encourage employers to develop skills of persons with disability, the value of deduction is increased from 40 to 60,000. And there is two forms that you must complete for these purposes. One of those forms is an IT 180 form. And if you want to see how it looks like, jump into our website. You will see how it looks like and what are the requirements to complete that form. Secondly, for learners that are living with disability, there is a form called ITRDD. DD stands for Disability Declaration. And when that form is completed, there is a portion that must be completed by an attending specialist, where the disability would have been diagnosed and rightfully declared. So part of the portion is completed by the learner, but the diagnosis and the declaration of the disability must be completed by an attending specialist. I'm not sure if the period has now increased from 5 to 10 years, depending on the severity of the disability. So that form then becomes valid for a period of 5 years. And so for a period of 5 years, they don't need to go back to the attending doctor or the specialist. But depending on the nature or the severity of the disability, which will be captured by the attending specialist, it will take up to 10 years for that form to be redone again. So what are the criteria relating to the disability? So there is the ITRDT confirmation of a diagnosis of disability, which is available on the SARS website. So for those businesses, employers who would not have known previously that the value of the learnership or the value is increased from 40,000 to 60,000. And obviously this will also apply to the completion allowance. It will also increase when you get into the completion allowance, but provided it's right at the end of the completion of the program. Is that me? No. Okay. Someone is moving. Oh, it's Manuel. Okay, thank you. So let's speak to the prohibition of allowances here in terms of Section 12H, but in this instant, we'll focus on Section 12H6, which has been amended to eliminate the requirement that an employer must consider all previous learnership agreements with former employers. In essence, what does this mean? So you find a learner that has been hopping these programs. So I was in one program, signed an agreement there, maybe left 3-4 months into the agreement. Now I intend to change and move into another learnership. So why do we have this prohibition? Because we don't want a situation where you find learners are double dipping. Because remember, the resources that are spared for these SETAs, they are very lean resources. In essence, they are very lean. I mean, SETAs don't have, an open-ended budget. And to a certain extent, if you hear some people talking, in the media, and they would say, do away with the SETAs. It's a waste of money. There's a lot of corruption in that. And we have said these SETAs play a very critical role given what? Given the numbers of unemployment in this country. But what is needed is that these SETAs are well managed. And they are managed beyond reproach. Because you have learners who are double dipping in these SETAs. And until there is what one would call a prohibition measure, but that must be legislated to say who should be able to benefit and who should not be able to benefit. So part of that requirement is that an employer must consider all previous learner agreements with former employers. Because you cannot have one person or an individual or a learner for that matter benefiting throughout this learnership when other learners should actually be part of this program. You may ask you to move. Yes, please. No, previous page, please. Thank you. So an employer may not claim any annual allowance or any completion allowance for a new registered learnership agreement under this condition. And I think one question earlier on was that who is precluded from this? And this is what it says exactly. A learner who is a party to a new registered learnership agreement and has previously failed to complete any other registered agreement. So let's go back to the question. Employer may not claim annual or completion allowance for a new registered learner if that learner has done what? Has previously failed to complete any other registered learnership agreement to which the employer or associated institution was party. So, learner A joined a learnership program, failed to complete. What? Failed to complete the learnership with employer, say employer A. So here is this learner again, wants to enroll into another learnership agreement. That's an exclusion. And it speaks to my previous point to say that the resources with which the SETAs operate with are very limited resources. Secondly, if the other registered learnership agreement contains the same education and training component. So this learner cannot be eligible to enter into another learnership agreement if that contains the same education and training component. So it cannot be in the same SETA that carries out the same training components. So it would be an inclusion if it was in another SETA, and in the previous SETA, they would have completed the program. And this is to encourage what? Is to encourage learners to do what? To go through the full duration of the program. You can move into the next page. Okay, so basically these are the date of commencement as of the 3rd of January 2019, and a signed 3-year learnership agreement on the 10th of January 2019. The agreement was registered on 1 March. So earlier on I said the different employers or different companies would have different financial year end. So when are you able to register this learnership agreement? So at the beginning of the financial year end, you are able to register this learnership agreement because they are time bound. So they are bound to a period of 12 months, they are bound to a period of 24 months and up to 36 months. So that's when it must be registered. And where do you register this learnership agreement? So there's been a toing from to say, no, it's SARS, it's the SETA. Where do you register the learnership agreement? So should I assume that none of the people in this room have any registered learnership agreement? Okay, that's fine. I think we will have that conversation, or maybe we need to take people through the processes and the requirements. But the two critical elements here, it's the SETA. And when you come to SARS and you want to register for skills development levy, you must have obtained your SETA code. So SARS does not determine the SETA codes, but it helps you through the registration process. And part of the requirements for SARS, it would be for us to provide us with your SETA code, which will indicate you would have been registered or you are registered with the SETA. And if you go through the SARS website, it will give you clear directions or clear instructions in terms of how do you obtain that. If you go to any of the SETA, if it's W&RSETA, and it would give you a list of the SETA code. And it is important that you use the correct SETA code. Because we have instances wherein applications from the SARS side are rejected because of the incorrect SETA code. And I know some of you would have engaged with some SARS employees, and in some, if you would have walked into a SARS branch and you would come across, a consultant that is not well versed with some of, they might have probably turned you back. But if you go to the website, that information or the requirements are clearly stipulated there. You can move on. Okay. The learner was party to an agreement for only 1 full month until the year end. Therefore, the annual allowance must be prorated. I think we have spoken about this. And so obviously, if the allowance was 40,000 for the full duration of the agreement, which is 12 months, and the learner was only in the program for 1 month. And so we'll take that 40,000 and prorata it by what? By the duration. So that basically gives you a simple calculation of a learner who would have been in the program for a month instead of 12 months. And in some instances, I think this is part of the information that is not widely shared, amongst employers, to say if the learner does not complete the program, the allowance amount would be prorated. So this would give you an indication if this learner was in the program for 2 months, how much they would qualify for. If they were in the program for about 3 or 4 months, how much they would qualify for. And I earlier mentioned that why this. The purpose is to encourage learners to stay and complete these programs, because as you know, and as I've indicated, that these are SETA funded, and SETA funded simply means it's government funded, and it's funds that are very stretched, and it's funds that are very limited. Please move on. Okay, so this example would go back to when we said what are the allowances for a learner that is living with a disability vis-a-vis the learner that is not living with a disability. So the annual allowance is deductible in each year of assessment. That we all agree. The annual allowance in each year of assessment. So it cannot be over a period of 12 months and add, the 13-month or the 14-month into it. So for full 12 months during a year of assessment, the quantum of the allowance is equal to this. So if a learner has a qualification or holds a qualification of NQF level 1 to 6, that is the allowance, 40,000. Learner with no disability. Learner living with a disability, NQF level 1 to NQF level 6, 60,000 allowance. And therefore, it is also critical, more especially for, and I'm talking to employers now, businesses, that as you bring in these learners, you also get to know, or you establish their academic records. I know that is done by SACA, which is the South African Qualification Authority. But as part of your responsibility, please establish their academic qualifications, so that you know exactly where you're placing, or where your learners are placed. So NQF level to 10 for, and one would ask why a lower amount there, allowance amount. Anyone who wants to share their wisdom with us? Yes, ma'am.
Than the lower NQF level. So we need the skills on the lower NQF level.
Absolutely. Because NQF level 7 to NQF level 10. So those who have entry level Bachelor of Arts degree, that's entry level 7. Am I correct? Entry level Bachelor of Arts degree, that's, honors level, master's level. So now we set the mandate of these SETAs, or part of the mandate that they carry, is to develop skills. And where there is a greater need for skills development, it's at the lower NQFs, or it's at the lower strata of the society. So hence you'd see what? Hence you'd see the difference in that. So this demonstration applies for as long as it's done correctly. And I know part of the concern is that, it takes time for these allowances to be paid. We being shuttled around in terms of the documents that we need to submit it, or that we need to submit. We get frustrated going through these processes. But as you have encountered earlier, some people gave testimony that they have had to go through these processes, and it does work. Less than 12 months during year of assessment, we spoke about the pro rata. that learner must complete the program. So if it's not completed, the portion of the learner is party to a registered agreement. The apportionment will therefore apply if the learnership agreement commenced and ended partway through the year of assessment. So it repeats basically the previous slide to say if the program is not completed and it's left through or in the middle of the program, it will be apportioned. So the last 2 points speaks to the previous slide that we demonstrated. A pro rata of 40,000 for NQF level 1 to NQF level 6, and for NQF level 7 to level 10. That is the allowance that applies. Okay, you can move from this. Okay, here's a simple calculation that gives credence to what which is more or less likely linked to the. So for the year ended December 2017, learner B annual allowance was 40,000. But how long was he in the program? He was in the program for 3 months. So would he qualify for the 40,000 allowance? No, he would not qualify for the 40,000 allowance. So if you have learners in your program that have not completed or that intends not to complete their program, this pro rata will apply to them. Learner C annual allowance 20,000, and obviously this tells you what 20,000 NQF level 7 to NQF level 10. Allowance 20,000, they were in the program for 2 months of 12 months. The pro rata amount, it's what? 3,333 rands. Because they were in the program for what? They were in the program for only 2 months. And according to Section H, which you spoke about earlier on, the allowance for company A would be what? 13,333. So it goes back again to say it is critically important for learners to complete this program because it has an impact in their career journey, but also has an impact for the employer because the employer are not seeing the full benefits of these allowances if learners are allowed, to come in and out of this program as they wish. Okay, this is more or less the same as the previous. These are just calculation, but maybe as part of the agreement, we will share this with you. And we will just find out if you can have access to this. But remember, this information, it's not cast in stone. So obviously, different applications or different scenarios would apply based on the dynamics of a particular company. Now, I think this would be the last portion I speak to, the completion, and I think I've been repeating this many times. The completion of allowances, very critical. For employers, why? Because it gives you access to the completion allowance. And remember, if there is no completion of the program, you're losing out on what? You're losing on the completion allowance because earlier on we spoke about the annual allowance and the completion allowance. So if you get your prorated annual allowance, that means ultimately it will lead you to not qualifying for the completion allowance, which is one-off and it's in addition to what? To your annual allowance. And as I've indicated, that will require sufficient proof of the successful completion. So it is incumbent on the employer to demonstrate that the program has been successfully completed. And normally confirmation from the relevant SETA is deemed by SARS to be confirmation. So you're not going to draw up your own completion agreement. So it must be confirmed by what? By the relevant SETA, which forms part of the requirements for SARS. And many employers, however, are having difficulty in obtaining this confirmation from the SETAs. And why? Why employers are having a difficulty obtaining this confirmation? Because if we go right back to the beginning of this dialogue, we said there must be 3 elements in this agreement. We spoke about the learner, we spoke about the provider, we spoke about the employer. So you find some agreements that are not done the right way, which leads to employers having difficulty getting this confirmation. Because, I mean, if you are duly registered with recognized, well, all SETAs are recognized, by the way. If you are duly registered with a SETA, it should not be a hassle you obtaining this. So now you have employers that are sitting, fighting with the SETA and having an issue with SARS. And which is something that we trust that employers will want to avoid. I think at this point in time, we will take questions. I'm not sure in which order. I would allow the organizers maybe to guide us through that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thanks, Fonny. I think, guys, due to the interests of time and us running quite far behind schedule, we are going to have to hold questions at the end, or maybe even just engage directly with Fonny after we've had the rest of our presentations. But can I just ask you all to give Fonny a big round of applause, please, for that presentation. Thank you so much. All right, so moving on to our next presentation, I would like to please call up Johannes Koser from Nedbank, one of the economists, to give his speech. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So the pointer is not working. Oh, it's working. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's been very interesting information that we have had so far. And I believe my portion is also going to be an interesting one instead of being a depressing story, but I doubt. So the purpose of my presentation is to give you a brief economic update and also our assessment in terms of the outlook and on how we believe things are going to unfold in the economy. So we all know that so far our economy has been very weak. It has been struggling to recover. Okay, you can go back to the previous slide. So yeah, in this slide here, I'm just showing where we start. I mean, this yellow line here just showing where we were just before COVID, and this red line is just showing the recovery that we've made so far. And as you can see, we just only made very slight improvement from the pre-crisis level, and so as an economy, we are stuck. But why are we stuck in that level? Is because we are still facing structural and cyclical issues. Most of you know them and their impact to the economy. The first one being higher inflation, rising interest rates, and also with global demand. As you know, that South Africa is an open economy. We interact with other economies. And also because of the impact of load shedding, we've seen some improvement so far, but it's still lagging in the background. We had logistical challenges where Transnet transportation of goods has been lower than what you would expect for the economy to to improve. We also had political uncertainties increasing towards the elections, but again, that has since subsided after the elections. So what happened so far, if we check 2024 numbers, we see that, the economy performed poorly still in the first quarters of the year, just managed to grow by 0.5% in the first quarter, and then 0.3% in the second and third quarters. But even after that, we have had some improvement. We've had inflation coming down. We've had the Reserve Bank starting to reduce interest rates. And also some of the logistical challenges have moderated and political uncertainties have eased. But again, the economy is struggling to gain momentum. But at least there are some positive news on top of that. We have seen the latest numbers for the third quarter. I can move to the next slide. So when it comes to economics or looking at the economy, you can look at it from different angles, from the production side and from the expenditure side. So this is the production side where we look at the performance of the industries. So far in the third quarter, we've seen the economy contracting by 0.3% quarter on quarter and 0.3% year on year. But when you look at the industries so far, these have been, the red lines have been, the red ones obviously are the ones that contracted, and the green ones are the ones that have expanded. So far we've seen most of the industries starting to improve, either growing or contracting at a slightly slower rate, which is an indication that we've seen some improvement. But the biggest drawback came from agriculture, which is this red line here. It just drew all the industries down, which also makes sense that you will remember that last year we have had drought across the country, and also we had some industries like the livestock industry suffering from animal diseases and the impact of the bird flu and all of that. So as a result of that, we've seen the agriculture sector performing poorly and reducing the growth rate. So from the expenditure side, it's divided into four components, which is the net export position, which is basically the difference between our imports and exports. We have government consumption expenditure, we have fixed investment or fixed capital formation, and of course, the biggest category, which is 65%, is private consumption expenditure. So I'll take you through how these have developed so far and what we expect going forward. So starting with the global environment, which is the net export position portion, we've seen globally, again, the economies have been struggling to recover, also again reflecting the impact of high interest rates and inflation. So even in most of the major countries, we had inflation coming down, but inflation is not yet back to the central bank's target. So we've seen interest rates coming down, but not at the pace that what was anticipated, or at the pace that will peak growth significantly. So in 2024, according to the IMF, the global economy grew by 3.2%, which is only a slight improvement from the 2023 level. And if you check at the breakdown, you'll see that, the US was performed, the growth rate slowed to 2.8 from 2.9. We've also saw the Eurozone performing or growing by less than 1%. Japan contracted, and the UK only 0.9%. And these are our major trading partners. If you check in this line here, I'm just showing the components or the exposure that we have to those countries. Like, for example, in the Eurozone, we export 36% of our export to that area. The US accounts for 15%, China 14%, and Japan 10%, and the UK 9.4%. So when growth slows down in those industries, in those countries, obviously our exports are affected. The next slide. And on top of that, when global growth is weaker, also it's also reflected by the weakness in terms of the commodity prices. So globally, the commodity prices have been experiencing mixed performance. The first one is gold. You see, gold did very well last year. So last year, it was a very difficult year. So many countries were preparing for elections, and there was like a high degree of uncertainty in the global economy. So what happened? Investors, they bought a lot of gold, which is safer than other commodities. So as a result of that, we've seen the gold price increasing to record levels, and even today it continues to increase. But if you look at the other commodities, which is platinum, for example, it's just only ticked up slightly in 2024, but the long run average, it's like been flat. If you look at iron ore, our major trading partner is China, and because of the challenges in the Chinese property market, we've seen demand for iron ore slowing down. And coal prices just only flatlined. So it's been a combination of weaknesses in the commodity market and also some improvement in the few of the major commodities. But the net effect is that the commodity prices did poorly in 2024. So how we're affected is that, our exports performed poorly, meaning that we paid more than what we generated, which is the difference between imports and exports. And the net effect of that is that this net export position subtracted about 0.5 percentage point from our GDP growth. What do we expect to happen going forward? We don't expect much, obviously, from the global economy this year. In fact, we only expect the global economy to grow by 3.3 percentage points. The same reasons that I've highlighted earlier. One of our major trading partners being the US, growth will slow down to 2.7%. We'll see a pickup in the Eurozone to 1%. Japan will also increase from the recession, and the UK will increase by 1.6%. But again, because of the impact of the poor performance from the other countries, the net effect is only a small increase in global growth. So that will continue to have an impact on the performance of our net export position. So the point is that the net export position is still going to be a drag to our economy. Okay, these two graphs, I'm just highlighting how the inflation developments in the major countries. As you can see, inflation came down quite significantly, but it's still above the central bank's target. So as a result of that, the central banks have reduced interest rates, but they are not reducing as aggressively as we would wish them to be, because inflation is still above targets. So with high inflation and high interest rates settling higher, we still expect that to affect global demand and ultimately affect our net export position. And obviously, the whole story, the impact of the latest US election results with Donald Trump coming in. The tariffs in the US are going to increase production cost, which again is going to fuel inflation and also cause the central banks to be more cautious. The tight labor market is also going to add into the inflation, and generally his policies, we believe, are going to reduce global trade. We can move to the next one. And then back home, there have been some positive development, as I mentioned earlier. This graph shows the amount of electricity generated by Eskom. So in full capacity, they should be producing 100%, but at the moment, they are producing at around 60, which is the energy availability factor. It's an improvement from 2023, where the energy availability factor was 55. Last year, it averaged at 60. But again, if you check, it's still way lower than the level of production that they experienced around 2017. So load shedding has subsided because of that, but again, it's still lingering in the background because of that big gap. This is the volume, okay, can you go back to this is the volume of goods transported by rail. As you can see, there's been a very big decline from 2019 up until 2023. We have seen some recovery in 2024, but again, it looks like it's losing momentum. It's reflecting the challenges that Transnet is experiencing. This is the processing of bulk mineral goods, again, by Transnet. Again, as you can see how much it has declined, and it's also showing a downward trend. And again, it's lower than the long-term trend. This is the processing of containers at the ports. Again, we've seen some improvement last year, but it's still lower than the 2018 level. So this also reflects what I've mentioned earlier about the performance of our exports. The next one. So far, with the positive developments that we've seen, the subsiding of load shedding, the reduction of policy uncertainties after the elections, and also a promise of acceleration in policy implementation has boosted business confidence. This blue line here shows how business confidence tends to move with private sector investment, which is the yellow line. So when business confidence improves, we tend to see fixed investment improving. Last year, we've seen business confidence improving, and again, as a result of that, we've seen private sector investment starting to pick up. So this is how the fixed investment portion has been performing. It has been like the outlier. If you check, this is government consumption spending. This is private consumption expenditure. So those two have been the main driver of the economy. And fixed investment has been an outlier. But so far, there is some good news, as I mentioned, that we're starting to see private sector increasing investment because of the improvement in confidence. So we are seeing a flat line, which we believe is going to be followed by an upturn in fixed investment. And these graphs here are just attesting to what I've just mentioned now. These are quarter-on-quarter performance in fixed investment. We've seen fixed investment growing by 0.3% in the third quarter after contracting for 4 quarters. That is the same graph, but on a year-on-year basis, it's showing the annual rate of contraction in fixed investment slowing down to 3.2% from a very deep 7.3%. And in this graph here, I'm just highlighting where we've seen positive development in terms of our overall infrastructure challenges, starting with political uncertainties. So towards the end of last year, it turned from orange to green. Electricity, it's also green from red and orange, and then turned to green. Transport bottlenecks are still there, but it just changed to orange from red. An indication that we're having positive development. We're having water issues, as you all know, here in Joburg. The water crisis that we're facing, it remains in red, which means it's a red flag. In terms of fighting crime and corruption, we still have not seen any development so far. And also in terms of municipality services, it remains in red. In terms of fiscal consolidation, which is government's finances, we are starting to see some improvement with government promising to reduce unnecessary expenditure. So, just before that. Well, this one is just it's from the Reserve Bank. It's also confirming that, the reduction of load shedding is going to have a positive effect in the economy. This is how much load shedding has subtracted from our growth, which is 1.5 percentage point. In 2024, it subtracted 0.2 percentage point, and in 2025, they expect it to have an less significant impact. Okay, move to the next one. So going forward, we still expect fixed investment to continue to improve. This is very important because it drives employment in the country. This is the red graph shows the performance of fixed investment and employment. As you can see, they tend to move together. So far with that small increase in private sector investment, we've also seen improvement in employment. So this is very important. And we expect this kind of recovery to continue this year. Why do we say so? We also have a research called Net Bank Capital Expenditure Project Listing, where we track fixed investment or announced fixed investment projects. So it's a lead indicator of growth in fixed capital formation. So far we've seen a very big jump in terms of project announcement this year. In 2024, which indicates how much fixed investment will grow in 2025. So as a result of that, we believe that fixed investment will grow by 1.3% in 2025 and contribute positively to employment creation and the economy. This portion talks about government expenditure. I'm not going to elaborate more on that since we're still waiting for the new budget numbers to come out. But overall is that, we expect government spending to also continue to drive the economy, as I showed you in the graphs that showing private consumption expenditure and government being the drivers of the economy. So far, the last one, which is consumer spending, accounting for 60%, has been the main driver of the economy. And it has also been suffering from the factors that I mentioned earlier. But last year, we've also started to see some pickup in consumer spending, which is reflected by this graph here. How did it improve? It's because we've also seen an improvement in disposable income because of low inflation. This graph here is just showing how our inflation has improved. We've seen inflation falling to as low as 3%. I mean, the latest numbers came out today, and our forecast was that it will be around 3.4%. So far, our inflation picture, or our positive inflation picture, has been supporting disposable income, and it has been driving the spending growth that we have experienced. And going forward, we still expect inflation or low inflation to continue to support disposable income. This green bar shows the average wage settlement, and this is the inflation. So the difference between the two is growth in real wages. And as you can see, in the past 2 years, we've seen growth in wages turning positively and supporting spending. And as I mentioned again, we've seen an improvement in employment, as reflected by this graph, and we expect this trend to continue in line what I spoke about fixed investment. Don't confuse this with the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate remains high because the labor force continue to grow, and we also have a very big pool of the number of unemployed people. But again, we have been growing employment. So employment has not been growing enough to reduce the unemployment rate, but it has been growing. And then again, we had positive developments in terms of interest rates. The Reserve Bank responded to low inflation, reducing interest rates. But again, you see it's still at a high level, but because of that drop, it also boosted spending. The next one. Okay, so what we expect to happen going forward, we still believe that, inflation is going to be the main driver of spending through its impact on disposable income. This year, we expect inflation to average 4.1%, and this is our balanced view. You can go to the next one. The reason why I say it's our balanced view, there was just one before that. Okay, yeah. No, I don't know what happened, but there were some factors here motivating our inflation story. So the reason why I'm saying it's a balanced view is because we looked at the positives, yes, and the negatives. So on the positive side, or the downside to inflation, is that, so far we've had good rains in the country, and we believe that's going to be a positive impact on food inflation, which is the biggest in the inflation bracket. And also because global oil prices has been benefiting from excess global supply, as I discussed in the impact of the global economy. So in the global economy, demand has been lower, but supply has been higher. So the net effect of that is that we've seen the oil price remaining lower than where it was supposed to be by this time. And also we've had some improvement in domestic supply conditions. Some of the factors that I also highlighted is the impact of no load shedding, which is also reducing the operating costs. And again, our logistics are improving. It's still quite tight, but again, there is some positive developments. But again, on our inflation outlook, we also took into account the negative impact, the biggest one being the rand-dollar exchange rate, which is again very vulnerable to the developments in the global economy. Like, for example, how the US is going to respond in terms of their interest rates. So if as I mentioned, that we are likely to see the new policies in the US being inflationary, meaning that the US Federal Reserve is not going to reduce interest rates quite significantly. So how it affects us is that the Reserve Bank is also not going to respond aggressively because they have to maintain the interest rate differential. So it's going to affect us in that way. And again, one of the reasons why we have had low inflation is because of global food inflation, which has been coming down quite significantly. But now we believe that after it came down, it creates a base effect, and now once the base starts to reverse, we will see food inflation increasing. There are also risks from the administered prices, the biggest one being electricity tariffs, and again, we're going to get a VAT increase, and because, the unions are demanding high wages. I mean, so far, for the next 3 years, the unions have settled with 5.5% wage increase, and if you check, the inflation rate is just 4.1%. So that is another risk to our inflation outlook. But taking into account these two developments, the net effect is the balanced view that I mentioned, that will have inflation averaging for 4.1% in 2025 and 4.6% in the next 2 years. The next one. Yeah, so what's the implication of that to our interest rates outlook? We believe that, with inflation remaining within the Reserve Bank's target, there is scope for the central bank to continue to reduce interest rates. But again, they are not going to be aggressive as they assess the developments, especially from the impact of the U.S. new policies. So now, after that 25 basis points cut in January, we believe that the central bank is going to leave interest rates unchanged in March and in May, and only cut in July after assessing the whole situation and how that's going to affect the inflation outlook. So the cut that we'll experience in July is going to be the last one, and they will leave the interest rates unchanged. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. This is just a summary table of the key variables. We expect consumer spending, which is 60% of the economy, to grow by 2.3% this year. Fixed investment to grow by 1.2% after contracting in 2024. And net exports position to be a drag again to our economy, because imports will be growing faster than exports in line with improvement in in domestic demand. And the net effect is that, we'll have growth of 1.4% this year, which is an improvement from the 0.5% in 2023. So in the next 2 years, we see growth continuing to improve and average just less than 2% at 1.8%. These are just the other indicators. And yeah, that concludes my section, and thanks for listening. I think I can take questions.
Thanks so much, Giannis. Apologies, guys, that we've skipped over the question sections, as we've been running a bit behind since our delayed start this morning. But we are hoping to all share some lunch together, and hopefully you can engage with some of our speakers and ask your questions then. But we do greatly appreciate your time and coming out and joining us today. Those of you who've joined us live at our venue, and also those who've joined us online. I really hope you'll also join us in promoting this amazing initiative and helping us build the skills within our industry. I really think it can be beneficial to all of us. And please spread the word. All of the fuel retailers, let your fellow retailers know. Let's try and build this. Let's build some skills in our industry. Before I let everyone go, I won't spend too long because I know everyone's very keen on lunch, but I do need to run through some thank yous quickly. And just a very big thank you to Martha and W&RSETA for sponsoring this event and helping promote awareness around this. We really appreciate you and your contributions. Thank you so much. PetroConnect as well for putting everything together, organizing everything. I'd like to give Sapir a bit of a shout out because she's been running in the background. She deserves that round of applause, guys. Quite a stressful job putting this all together, and she's done a fantastic job with it. All of our speakers that have made time to come and talk to everyone today, thank you. We appreciate you. Our media streaming team for today, this is going live, and we will be sending out links as well. So, that's fantastic. And finally, the venue here. at the Wanderers Club. Thank you for providing us with such an awesome venue. All right, guys, so that's really it for our presentation today. We're going to share some lunch with you, so just to let you know where to go. When you exit the door, if you look to your left, you'll see a lift. It should take you down to the lower ground floor, where you'll be directed to your lunch. If you haven't quite made your 10,000 steps for the day and you'd prefer to take the stairs, Protea will be there at the top of the stairs to guide you down as well. I would also like to let you know that we do have a halal table, so we have made provision for that. And yeah, guys, please feel free to engage with us, spend some time networking. We look forward to sharing some lunch with you, and thanks for your time.